Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. The real work, the main task, is and will always be the work that we do on ourselves. No matter how seductively important the world outside may call upon us to do and act and dedicate ourselves to, it's just a ruse. It's just seduction, pulling us out and away from what needs to be done. But the unpredictability factor of all that the six sense doors bring to us and the sets of unknowns, situations, circumstances that ricochet off of each other constantly. We'll never run out of reasons for us to give ourselves so that we can seep out and leak out into the world. So we can engage in something a little bit more important than what needs to be done right here. And in this task of that we give ourselves of going out, following that carrot on a stick that each of our sense doors, six sense doors, give us, there's always the promise of the perfection, seeking a sense of unattainable perfection. But at least we can try. That's what we can say to ourselves. So there's this sense of fake nobility we attribute to ourselves, and even in this effort. Because it's a lot more colorful, a lot more flamboyant, a lot more in its data collection capacity, whereabout we can go ahead and tell others about this and that. So there's this extra relatable characteristic to it, this sense of always going outside to fix, to do things, to improve upon, so we can reach the state of perfection, which, by the way, will never come. Perfection will never be attained. And this hurts some part of ourselves, some part of the mind. We don't like to hear that. How come perfection cannot? I mean, I can go after it, right? Yes. Of course. And we need to be putting the effort, the energy to improve on ourselves and, by extension, improving the world around us. But that stems from the work that one does on oneself. not the other way around. Never has been the case, and it never will be if we study the teachings of Lord Buddha, if we study his life, if we study the lives of his students. But we are masters at fooling ourselves. But it has such a powerful sense of, there's this sense of drive behind this wanting to go out and get things. Where I live now, there are a lot of organisms around me, shall we say. There's geckos, different types of insects, roosters, chickens, birds, cats, you name it. And I spend some time, whenever I'm not working on my computer, I always take a break and just look around and see how the gecko is always looking. It's always looking, trying to find that thing, that food source, while at the same time checking out the terrain around it to see if there's another gecko coming after him, a bigger one. And there's a constant battle of setting the tones as to who's the dominant one. The chickens are always scurrying around, trying to feed their chicks and trying to look around if there's any earthworm, this insect, food, grain, something, while at the same time looking over their shoulder just to see if there's anything, a predator. We're no different. We're no different. Each of us, organisms, are seeking the sense of perfection in this state, intangible state that we can at least aspire to, where things will be just perfect. This is a delusion, and one that we dedicate our lives to, entire lives to, and humanity has done that. Beings have done that for countless eons, and will continue to do so. Now, when we come across the teaching of the Buddha, from the very start, he just lays it out in front of us. Dukkha, he says. Dukkha. Suffering, the sense of constant realization that the state of perfection is unattainable. Now, this requires the person to generate within them the sense of capacity to accept this. Because it's a heavy diagnosis. Not everyone can realize dukkha, can see dukkha for what it is, because it requires a sense of maturity, understanding. It doesn't come with age, of course. It comes with the level of understanding. To ask the question, why, which necessitates the presence of being aware of dukkha, being there in the first place, and not fooling oneself. So we need to be okay with the presence of dukkha first and foremost. Can I be okay with the fact that there cannot be a state of perfection, which requires a tremendous level of honesty as well, truthfulness, which the Buddha called satcha, the truth, being truthful. Being truthful also means being a realist, seeing things for how and what they are, not fooling ourselves. Now, every step that we take in this direction takes us closer to ourselves, to us and the work that needs to be done. Here, nowhere else. Not a second away from here and now. Not an inch away from here. Now, this is what turns us into more 3D. It grants us this state of or awareness of this presence. And now, immediately, a sense of detachment takes place because the eyes are not gazing outward. They're looking at oneself. They're becoming more and more truthful towards oneself, seeing things as they are. Yatha bhutang pajanati, the Buddha says. Now, unfortunately, majority of us humans or non-humans, we're always looking away. And a lifetime is yet again wasted. Now, the maturity I mentioned earlier opens the doors for the person to own up their own lives, their own thoughts, their own verbal actions, their own physical actions. And they want to do something about it. Now it gets interesting. This is where we develop the capacity to have more and more control over how we intend on choosing actions that are wholesome and no longer unwholesome. These are the steps that can take a person towards true nobility, towards becoming a superior person, which the Buddha called sappurisa. Noble or superior person is not a person who's born with certain characteristics, like so many scholars and historians have translated it as. Our birth does not bring us much, it's our choices with this birth, however it may have turned out to be, the choices in the actions that can bring us closer to that state of perfection, which, the way I understand it, is the relinquishment of suffering, which the Buddha called nibbana. And that's something that we need to be okay with discussing and working towards. For a long time, in the West at least, actually in the East as well, in Asia, there's been this sense of separation, dissociation from even the word, the concept of nibbana as something tangible. For many people. And for others, they've turned this, the nibbana, the reality of it, into such a otherworldliness, something out there that needs to be achieved, get to. Completely, again, neglecting the presence of what is happening. the actions we commit by going away from ourselves and what is really taking place within us in the presence of awareness and understanding, these actions are like the excess or extra noise that come to mute, to silence what is going on here inside, which the Buddha talked about as tanha, the search, or this, not, I wouldn't call it the search, the thirst rather. Tanha. I want things to be different. That longing, that yearning. And in other places, the Buddha described this sense of longing, this craving as fire. Everything is burning, he says, with this craving. The eye is burning, the ears are burning, the tongue is burning, the mind, the nose, the body is burning. Burning with what? The desire to experience more of something that is better than this. Better than this. Seeking of perfection again. It's like the dog trying to catch its own tail, running in circles. And if we can look at that, look at ignorance with that image, now we can get a better appreciation of avidya, or the lack or the absence of wisdom, the absence of discernment. Avidya is not a lack of information necessarily, or lack of knowledge. Avidya is, or has everything to do with, refusing to see what is taking place, what is happening. And wisdom is the opposite of that. Yatha bhutang pajanati. He knows how things come to be, how things are happening, not outside, but how they're happening, how they're taking place here. Given my relationship with what just took place. The eyes just brought in this information. The ears are bringing this information. The thought or the body is generating this sensation. And all of a sudden, there's this sense of feeling that comes up. What kind of feeling is it? And we don't even pause to question this. We immediately solidify, crystallize this feeling as if we put it on in deep freeze, and this becomes us. My feeling. And we sit down, we write books on it, identify with it. This is who I am. This is something that I will fight against, etc., which is another form of identification, which is the opposite side of pleasant feeling, which is painful. I need to get rid of you feeling. So the mind that is in a state of not avidya, which is vidya, be able to see, understand, be wise. We'll look at this happening. In mid-sentence, the mind will understand this identification and see, wait a minute, a millisecond ago, I didn't have this feeling. Where did this come up from? How did it end up on my plate? of experience. Oh, I saw that. Ooh, there was a knock on my door a certain way. I opened the door and there's this person standing in front of me, angry. Oh, that's how. But I was in such a state of, what happened? But that moment ended about a year ago. I'm still dwelling on it because of some trigger that just brought it to my awareness again. It's not the things that are happening outside. The show is always on the inside. And that is the biggest show in the world of all time. To discover it for ourselves. The Buddha discovered it for himself. So did his students, his disciples. And they continue to do so to this day. The Buddha dedicated 45 years of his life, this great teacher, to teach us, to help us, to encourage us, to arouse the interest within us, to take a peek inside, to take a peek into the mind, and to be truthful and look at life as it is taking place without losing anything in translation, without adding our own smear of what we would like things to be, how we would like things to be, and seeing dukkha for dukkha as it is. And then ask the question, why is there this state of constant longing, this sense of lack? I always have to go outside of myself to search this sense of perfection, that once it is attained, in my mind only, a state that will never take place, so long as it's projected outward. Where is this coming from? And that's what the Buddha said as the cause of suffering, which is ignorance, avidya. These two steps take us to the third, because the very fact that we acknowledge this is happening, who am I fooling? I'm fooling myself? For how long am I going to continue living like this? Because my body is telling me every day that I'm just a fool looking at the mirror. The mirror is telling me that whatever I'm trying to hold on to is just, it's a joke. It's a delusion that I want to keep myself young, healthy. When I'm holding on to this person, I know they're going to be leaving me. I'm going to leave them. Impermanence everywhere. Suffering everywhere. So sooner or later, we need to grow up. We need to be mature enough to see this for what it is. And the moment we do, there is nirodha. There is this drop completely. It's just disengages itself, this grasping of, well, craving. It just, at least it opens up, relinquishes some of that tight hold on us, on the mind. And we get a glimpse of liberation. We breathe. And so long as we continue on this path, there arises the enthusiasm, the interest, the strong interest in, I want more. Now, this means that the person is now looking in the right direction, where the show is, where true actions take place, life-changing actions take place, where we do have control in the choice of our actions. And then the person says, okay, how can I have more of this? And that's why the Buddha gave the fourth of the Four Noble Truths, which is the Eightfold Path. Now, maintaining this course is not easy. For that, we need to be established in right view. This is undebatable. We cannot talk ourselves out of this. And for this, Venerable Sariputta in the Sutta, Samadhi Sutta, goes at length explaining this in detail. How there's so many different layers of it. You don't need to know all of them. And that's why the Dhamma, whichever angle we come to it and be exposed to it, is all, if it's true, genuine Dhamma, the right view is going to be there. And the Buddha says constantly, you do not need to know even a whole sutta. If you can just memorize 4 lines of a verse, or even a line, that's sufficient, he says, to become an accomplished expert. Accomplished expert. So we don't need to take notes. We don't need to go ahead scurrying around the internet trying to compare this and that. We need to just drop everything. At least once a day. And create this oasis for ourselves to just absorb. Even a little. Because everywhere we look in the Dhamma, if it is genuine Dhamma, it has not been corrupted, then it must have the 4 aspects. The 4 Noble Truths are there. Just like a diamond. If you take a huge diamond and you cut it, even if you bring it down to grains of sand, it will still remain diamond on the very molecular level. That is how the Dhamma is. Now let's bring that into our lives. Let's apply whatever time we have left in this body, however much health it still has. Let's dedicate it to the practice instead of going outward, whether physically or temporally, into the future. That when this and that happens, that's when I will reach a state of contentment. That state of contentment will happen within us. Happens within us. Is happening within us the moment we are seeing dukkha for what it is. And we are humbly looking at it, and trying to understand. And there is nikkhamma, there is this sense of disenchantment that takes place, this renunciation with what was occupying our attention for a whole lifetime, perhaps, up until that moment. And that is why we practice sati. That is why we practice sampajanya, mindfulness, and clearly understanding what is taking place. That is where nibbana is. Not somewhere out there. Nibbana is in the constant state of understanding how things come to be. With a state, with an understanding, with a mind state of wisdom that permeates everything that one does. And the undercurrent is not craving anymore. The undercurrent is constant state of mindfulness. Now talk about liberation. Talk about perfection at that point. Because the outside situations and the 6 senses, they just become at that point our own instruments. of manifesting and sharing that state of contentment with the world around us. Now we're talking. Now we're actually changing the world. This is what is meant about when we say changing the world from the inside out, versus the delusion that our societies, our social sciences, and all the philosophies in the recent years have been trying to tell us, which is, oh, let's change the world around us and then we'll get to this sense of satisfaction. No, it's delusion. I'm not going to give my neck out to the outside situations that are controlled by others, situations or people. I make my own decisions of my own thoughts, my own speech, and my own action. Nobody's going to dictate that, not even the Buddha. That takes tremendous courage. That's why I insisted on using the word maturity earlier, because this path is not for everyone. We need to have a spine. We need to have a backbone of responsibility, of living life with responsibility, regally, with nobility, through each and every one of our actions. Thought, verbal communication, whether to ourselves or others, and most definitely physically with our bodies. So I will share that with you now, and open for any questions and thoughts and comments and critiques you might have. Yes, Jagat, Russell.
Thank you, Bhante. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Let me see. I can't quite hear the sound. Or maybe I kind of misunderstood, when you were talking about, you have to decide yourself. It's sort of self-determination, that you make, you have to assess where you are in the, on your path. Then I don't quite understand because because I'm thinking that also, one of the Buddha's ideas is the sort of interdependence of various conditions, which probably would include the external and the internal. So for instance, maybe I decide, maybe when I drink water even or something, but the water is actually coming from, unless I'm living in the forest, maybe it's coming from a faucet or the water company or whatever, and so forth. And I think there was a case in Michigan where, there was poison or some lead or some other poisonous chemicals in the water for, and it kind of affected a lot of minority communities. So they were drinking the water and, a lot of them got ill. So how do you negotiate I think I can understand what you're talking about in terms of internal, but a lot of time you do have to still have to deal with external conditions because they affect your internal being as well. So anyway, that's kind of my question. Yeah. Thank you.
By the way, happy Chinese New Year. Happy Chinese New Year, yes. There's no question about the internal and external. This is just mental conjurings of that one might have to really look the other way of what needs to be done. Meaning, well, there is this problem, the situation outside, compelling, you usually are, depending on the socially conscious value system that the person might have. Well, we need to do something with this. that does not go contrary to what needs to be done right here, right now with myself. Because, before I go ahead and fix the world, I need to fix myself. Now, that does not mean at any point that there needs to be this disengagement of oneself and you go ahead and live in some kuti or in a cave, completely ignoring what's happening in the world. Now, we've gone over this, I've mentioned this, I know, probably 100 times so far. In my IBMC days as a lay Dhamma teacher and as a monk as well, the Buddha never put a separation between, segregation rather, of no, we're just going to be dissociated from life, from social responsibility. That's never happened. This was a later addition through the Mahayana that put a cloud on the practitioners, the bhikkhus. And yes, sometimes they had some justifying factors in coming up with this formulation. However, in the teaching of the Buddha, you do not find that at any point. I mean, from his contemporaries, one is amazed to look at his teaching and seeing how much of a socially aware, conscious teacher he was in influencing society, starting with the individual, going outward into the family unit, into the society, into the whole country. So much so that even later, about 300 years later, Emperor Ashoka in India was completely blown away by this great teacher. And that's how he took it upon himself to promulgate and to spread the teachings of the Buddha because of its value vis-a-vis society. So this separation takes place within the mind of the person. Okay? So it doesn't happen in the Dhamma. So the attitude has to be fixed within the person, because so long as I'm gazing outward away from myself, I am going to be lazy with the work that really needs to be done. And the image that I've given, I think, to so many people in the past is that when you get on a plane, the flight attendants will show you the drill of what to do in case of an emergency, specifically when it comes to the oxygen masks that drop from the ceiling. They say, even if you're traveling with a child, your own child, whom you love, you will not put the oxygen mask on them first. You will have to put it on yourself first. Now, I've never seen anybody debate this because it's so self-explanatory. It's a no-brainer. Because if you lose in the midst of that chaos the oxygen mask to put it on yourself, you're dead and the child is dead in your attempt in putting it on them first. So we have this common sense that we apply with other mundane things, but when it comes to the real work of working on the freedom that it needs to take place within oneself, within one's mind, then we come up with excuses and look at the contents instead of the pattern that's happening. So that is what I like to offer there. Yes. Any other thoughts, questions? Years ago, I was mentioning this to someone actually a day ago, or I think. Years ago, when we were children in our family, like my brothers and my sister, we were one of the lucky ones, we used to have a black and white TV. This was in the 70s. So in those days, the color TV came out. And my parents, my dad was, we weren't wealthy by any means financially. So children being children, we kept nagging. And we first said it to our mom because she would, ricochet that to our dad. And one day we were surprised because he brought in this plastic screen, this sheet of plastic that was in color. It was basically yellow, I think. And he put it on top of the black and white television. They were selling these in the stores, and he said, "There you go, you have color TV." And we were like, "Come on, Dad, that's cheating. That's not what we meant." So actually, he had already devised a plan where he had gone and borrowed money, and one day he didn't show up for dinner for a few hours, and we got really worried, being Lebanon, in the war. And 3 hours later, he shows up, and there's a heavy knock on the door, and we open it, and we see Dad carrying this huge box, which turned out to be a color television, which he had brought to us so we can watch it. In those days it was Starsky and Hutch, if you guys remember. So the red car and all that, we wanted to see it in color. So it's interesting. The eyes always want to look at the more colorful, the more interesting, and the more data, if you will, they're offering the six senses, the more distractible the mind is. It removes us from the seemingly mundane, the not so exciting looking, feeling, thought, situation taking place. There were times when philosophers or people who just wanted to debate came to the Buddha for the sake of, quote unquote, converting him to their point of view. The Buddha never cared about philosophies. He would ask them, encourage them to sit down and meditate instead. But for a mind that is always in motion, that's one of the worst things that one could prescribe. Because on the outside, we look and we think, oh, look, I'm just going to sit still for an hour, 2, half an hour. That's so boring. Versus me looking at the newspaper, doing Sudoku, checking online, checking CNN, checking what this politics. No. That noise is always going to keep on going. And plus, who said that there's nothing going on when the person is sitting? If you've ever meditated, there's plenty of action going on there. Seeing and identifying and understanding all these fluctuations of the mind and how the mind has this tendency of constantly fooling itself. So there's this removal of layers of ignorance that is anything but boring. And if you do want to, shall we say, excite the mind, go ahead and read some suttas. There's so much encouragement there. Because let's face it, we need to generate within us the level of faith, commitment to continue to help us persevere, especially now in the world. To keep that desire, the one that the Buddha calls the chanda. The very first of the requirements for spiritual power. Chanda, that's that enthusiasm to want to continue swimming towards the goal. So however way we can support that, listening to or reading Dhammas, suttas from the Dhammapada, communicating, I would encourage you to do it with each other if you can, but not too often. I try to follow Venerable Anuruddha's example and just say, once a week, once a week, for 5 days or 6 days, no talking with each other, but one day, setting up a time where you can engage with each other and discuss about something about the Dhamma. That's very important. So what you're doing then is reinforcing yourself, protecting yourself, because the world is encroaching upon us. Any thoughts that any of this? Yes, KK.
Um, Thank you for a wonderful talk. Actually, it's exactly something that I needed so much, to how do I kind of give myself time every day to sit, to meditate? What would make me feel that it's exigent? And my problem is not the distraction that you were talking about wanting to be perfect, finding the outside world more interesting, but a perceived conflict. But I think by answering Russell, you also answer that there is no conflict, but the perceived conflict between sitting and matter, for instance. So for instance, my son just picked up a dog yesterday to foster, not as a pet yet, but to foster. So young adults, being young adults, of course, then they say, Mom, can you make sure he's okay? And I'm going off. And so the first thing I woke up this morning is, of course, to say, I'd rather meditate, but, I better check on the dog to see whether it's okay. But I think, and also make sure that he's not hungry or she is not hungry, giving the dog food. But your answer to Russell suggests that maybe it's okay for me to go down and still think about my mind, and if I need to walk the dog, it will be a walking meditation. So the conflict is really between just sitting down and doing something more than like doing something that is affecting the not in accordance with the Dhamma. So I just would like to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, it's setting up priorities and at the same time boundaries, because otherwise conflicts are happening all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I've wasted years of my teenage life conflicting with myself with this and this, and then I would have an argument, something, and I would counter argue myself. So pros and cons constantly. And that carried itself to some extent into my 20s, but I saw that I was actually wasting so much valuable time because the work was not getting done. It's if you've ever tried to make a choice about something that is important, you look at the pros and cons of this and pros and cons of this, and if you are not becoming decisive as to why you even want to look at these two, you're going to be in a perpetual state of conflict and nothing is going to get done. It's like I used to tell this to some patients who came with hoarding tendencies in the house, or people who don't want to clean up their room. Well, where should I start? Well, they stand in the middle of the room if they can find an inch of space that is not crowded and say, well, I could do this or I could clean that up, but that's going to have, so the pros and cons are being looked at and nothing is being done versus just look at one corner. Today, I'm going to dedicate my entire day to removing this 1 cubic space, 1 meter cube space of this room. That's all. That's all. Yeah, that's all. Can you do that? Okay. And then the next time I see them, they're so alive. They're refreshed. Why? Because they started doing something. I used to talk myself out of sitting because there were other priorities in my mind. Well, I have to do this. I have to go and take out the trash. I have to do that. And then, meanwhile, it's like 4 hours passed and I have to be at work. Instead of okay, let me do 1 or 2 things of those. And instead of sitting for 1 hour, I could sit for maybe 30 minutes, but sit nevertheless. So that's how I would try to.
Okay.
Any other thoughts, questions? Yes, Tamadina.
Thank you, Bhante. As you were talking, I couldn't, and also as Russell asked his question, I couldn't help but be reminded of how we live in a world where there's this not only encouragement but pressure to, excuse me, to go out of yourself, to be active and help others who are in pain, and this um, great emphasis that is placed on group identity versus the individual identity. And I can speak, for example, in the context of the university, we are taught today that there's this the foundational relationship between people is one of oppressor, oppressed, and the content, of course, can vary. Women, men, racial, sexual differences, and there's this very, very strong push to see people in those terms. Groupism, basically. We're not encouraged to see ourselves as individuals first, but all as parts of groups. And with that, I think looking at the Dhamma in that context, it really becomes almost natural for us to see that when we work on ourselves, we're being very selfish in a very bad way. We're not compassionate enough. We're not caring enough of other people's issues or other groups' experiences. So I just realized that it doesn't have to be that way. We don't need to give in to that pressure, because just having sat in for meditation, for a few minutes, or having, even if we had only a single experience of peace and calm through our practice, or by reading a sutta, or by listening to a Dhamma talk, we know how it feels, and we know how that oasis of quietude and calm can help but seep into the world outside, our families, the most immediate environment that we are surrounded by. So then the individual experience, whether we like it or not, becomes a group experience, even if it's just me and my dog, or me and my parents. So that connectivity, the internal, the external, they don't need to be severed in those very crude ways. I just, I couldn't help but become aware of that larger context, that I would not even be afraid to use the word indoctrinated. This is, in my experience at the university, it's really intense, this whole emphasis placed on group experience, and which, of course, I'm not here to deny that we have varying experiences, and painful experiences for that matter, but it's really become difficult to be an individual and care for yourself. So that pressure is, again, we don't need to give in to that pressure. And the Dhamma gives us the what's the word? The permission to really look after our minds and really taste what that does to the world around us. Just wanted to share that.
Yes, thank you for your input. It does give us that permission, but it also gives us the protection, of course, and the ability to change the world, and comes from there. Otherwise, it's just, there's more damage that we can cause. It's one time I gave this very, I think before I was a monk, this image of a surgeon, an eye surgeon who goes to the restroom before the operation, or a heart surgeon, cardiologist. He goes to use the bathroom, but does not wash his or her own hands with a soap, and you need to wash them very carefully, even if you don't go to the restroom. Now, imagine this person coming out and trying to perform surgery on the eye, your eye, let's say. Would you be approving of this? A person who doesn't work on themselves doesn't, in this context, meditate, is very similar to that surgeon, not taking care of their hygiene. So we need to take care of our hygiene, mental hygiene, spiritual hygiene, before we go ahead and change the world, because otherwise my hands are very, very dirty. My heart is very dirty. My mind is very dirty. That's why you have politicians who promise you the moon. You have CEOs that promise us a better future. Well, where are they coming from? Lust, greed, hatred, and delusion. That's why I don't put an ounce of trust in any of these characters, because there are the kileshas functioning. They're coming from there. So how do I clean? How do I become more hygienic in my approach? And well, I address the kileshas. Society is not teaching us that. That's why I can't put my future, my well-being in the hands of society or the group. Because your university department or whatever it is, their goals are not necessarily to take care of, to remove, or the removal of kileshas, defilements. They're functioning from defilements. So even if people coming out and saying social justice, this and that, there's a lot of anger there. And no, it cannot coexist. I know some Buddhist teachers out there are even like giving talks and this on justified anger, they call it. Justified aggression. Complete, utter nonsense. That's not the Dhamma. Because it's coming from kileshas. They cannot coexist. So working on oneself, you're protecting yourself by looking at the kileshas and removing them first on a daily basis, while at the same time doing your part. And someone the other day asked me about when is the best time to meditate. I would encourage you as well, as I mentioned to them, is to start earlier in the day. Becoming hygienic, washing the hands, washing the mind from the kileshas as best as possible to set the tone right, and then going about your business. No one is expecting you, not even the Buddha, to go and live in a kuti. Live in the mental kuti that each of us carries, in your own hut, in your own mind. That's our personal work that must be done first, and in conjunction with the other work that needs to be done. And as you said, it will seep out, whether you like it or not, to the world, and it will benefit tremendously from that work. Our time is up, but I could take one more question, comment. In that case, I know I have, on a side note, I have mentioned, I think a month or two earlier, about us starting the suttas, exploration of suttas I haven't forgotten about that. I'm still in the process of settling in, and it's keeping me quite busy, and so many responsibilities, financial and otherwise. But I do want to have us start before the end of this month a sutta series, and which will go on. And if I could do one at least a month, I'm a happy camper, but hopefully more than one. And it will be randomly picked suttas, or suttas that you might be interested in also. You can send it my way, and I'm thinking of doing it in the form of YouTube Live. I have never done it, so I don't know how to do it. So I think it shouldn't be that difficult. So we can send an announcement, and it could be live and it could be recorded as it's going on. So I just wanted to mention, because bring that to your attention, because I mentioned it in the past. So before the end of this month, I would love for us to start. So that is my goal. So I wanted to give you an update on that. So other than that, let's conclude by dedication of merit. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired for the achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sad, sad, sad. Thank you for being here, for participating, and for practicing. That's all we got, ultimately. The work we put in, each of us. No one's going to save us other than our own efforts.
Thank you, Bhante.
Yes. And I commend you for your courage. This is not easy. I commend you for your courage, day in, day out. So please always start with this sense of goodness in you, appreciation of this goodness in your heart. Starting from there, that is the beginning, that is the spark of metta. So, yeah, I'll leave you with that. Be well and stay safe. Till next time.
Thank you.